Chris Mannix, you know, from NBC Sports Boston and Celtics coverage. He writes for Sports Illustrated. Chris, how you doing, man?
What's going on, Mike?
So, what's going on? I was talking to you on TV the other night, heard you on TV the other night, and you said you would be surprised if the NBA got their season back on this year, and that the feeling is that they're not going to get it back this year, and it's just going to be a cancellation, not a suspension. You said that 2 nights ago. Do you still believe that?
I still believe it's possible. I've spent the last couple of days talking to a lot of people inside the NBA and a handful of owners and ownership sources, and they're going to try everything humanly possible to get the game back on the floor. They don't have optimism at this point that they can do it, but if something changes in the next month that gives them even the possibility of doing it, they're going to jump at the chance. So I guess to say I'm a little more optimistic we will see a season, but I still think there's a strong chance that we don't.
Okay, so not that you're a doctor, but what are they saying would prevent them from doing it?
Well, look, they're taking their cues from everything that's going on around them. So if this virus doesn't trend into sort of a remission nationally, they're not going to come back. I mean, you heard Adam Silver on TV last night. There has to be a pretty significant change in circumstance, because one thing that's relayed to me often is, look, we come back, and even if we do it without fans, if things are still the same, there's a pretty good chance this happens all over again. And then we're right back at square one. So there's going to have to be a substantial change in circumstance for the NBA to come back. Now, that could happen, of course. I think everything that's happening right now is going to contribute to a downturn in the spread of this virus. So if things change, we could be back seeing basketball games, maybe May 1st. If they don't, at some point the NBA is going to talk about sort of a drop-dead date.
Chris, as I'm sure you know, some cities like this one have now, declared provisions or rules that do not allow gatherings of more than 250 people. So my question to you is, how much of this are they even deciding? In other words, how much of it is going to be government regulated or government overseen, and are they just going to have to comply to that? Yeah,
you're right, Tony. I mean, this is when it comes to playing in front of fans, they're not going to have much of a choice. I think by the time they get to a month from now, or even the next couple of weeks, you're going to see not just a handful of states, every state, maybe federally mandated, that you don't have crowds of X amount of size. That said, there are a lot of owners that, in an effort to get these games back and to get the millions of dollars and tens of millions of dollars in potential revenue back, they're going to lobby for finding ways to play without fans, whether that's playing in empty arenas or exploring, for example, the Lakers playing in like the Mamba Academy or something sort of outside the box thinking to get games being played. I think they're going to push for it. But you're 100% right. Fan attendance is probably going to be decided by state and local officials.
Chris Mannix again, NBC Sports Boston and Sports Illustrated. Those, outside the box things. We were talking about neutral site games, empty arenas, play-in games, reduced rounds, of all the creative things that you've heard that they're talking about, give me some of them that you like or don't like.
Well, I mentioned the Mamba Academy. That was one of them I had heard, and I thought that was kind of interesting, especially given, the circumstance of the last couple of months with Kobe Bryant and two teams, being in LA, most likely being in the playoffs. The NBA has some experience in venues that don't house fans. I mean, for years, and I think this past year was the first year it ended, the NBA had an Orlando Summer League, and that was effectively a week and a half of games played at a venue that didn't have fans. Fans weren't allowed in attendance. So that was televised. It creates kind of a blueprint for how they might do it. The neutral site thing really doesn't work all that well, just because you're going to run into a lot of the same problems even at neutral sites. You increase the travel as well for players of both teams. That doesn't make a ton of sense to me. And really, there are probably, I want to say, 4 or 5 teams that think the idea of playing in empty stadiums is just stupid, and that would prefer to shut this whole thing down until this virus is under control.
Chris, in terms of the impact on specific teams, and we've talked about this a little bit here, is there any shot if this thing drags on long enough that Kevin Durant comes back and plays for the Nets?
Not Kevin Durant, but to your greater point, maybe somebody. We're not at the point where we're getting ready to kind of discuss the basketball ramifications, but make no mistake, there will be. Whether it's, Ben Simmons, like, for example, Ben Simmons got a bad back injury right now. You give Ben Simmons a month off and then say you have another month until the start of the postseason. How different do the Philadelphia 76ers look? Durant is different because I don't think Durant, because of the severity of the original injury, I think they've already decided he's done season over altogether. But, how serious is the Kyrie Irving injury? I mean, he had surgery on it. Is it the kind of surgery that he could bounce back from in a couple of months? I mean, there are going to be examples of that in the NBA where this delay is going to allow players that otherwise would be either hobbled or unhealthy the ability to be healthy going in. I mean, I think that's a dynamic that's going to be really interesting to watch once they decide if they're going to play again.
Chris, we talked about this yesterday, and we had read quotes from certain executives at the Sloan Analytics Conference that the NBA is considering, or there's certain factions of the NBA that want to go to a summer schedule anyway, that they want to start at Christmas and take on baseball in the summer versus football in the fall. And this is, this is sort of a way to be forced into that trial balloon. Do you think there's some owners that are, saying this is a great chance to see it? And do you think the NBA ultimately wants to be that, a summer sport?
Well, absolutely, as a trial balloon. I've heard that from a lot of people in the last couple of days, that if they do come back and if the postseason is, even if it's just into July, they're going to get a lot of data out of it. And the data is really just going to be about television ratings. I mean, the only argument against changing the schedule in the radical way that Steve Koonin of the Atlanta Hawks has kind of suggested is television ratings. The assumption is that fans don't, the ratings will go down in summertime games. You play the finals in prime time in July, your audience is going to be diminished because more people are going to be out on a summer night or doing other things. So this could be a way for the NBA to kind of learn if that sort of, just that theory is accurate. So I think that's one potential upside. If the ratings are sky high, I don't know if that would make the NBA change right away, because I think they'd want to see a little bit more data than that. But I think that would certainly nudge in the direction of a schedule change that has a lot of people, that has a lot of support, quite frankly. If you can show that the ratings would not take any kind of hit or even just a small hit, and you could benefit from getting away from football for 2 months, I think you'll create a lot of momentum for the NBA to permanently change its schedule.
Chris, one of the other things I'm interested in, and you mentioned the idea of playing in empty arenas. My experience around the basketball people is they always thought that the games are officiated differently on the home and the road. If it's a neutral site game with no fans, what will that do to the officiating?
Improve it.
Maybe. I mean, like anybody else, officials are human and they can be influenced by the moment. We like to think that they're not, but in any sport, they can certainly be influenced by the roar of the crowd and all that. I honestly haven't had that particular discussion with NBA people. But again, when it gets to this point, we start talking about the ramifications of what happened on the actual game itself. They say we're coming back May 1st. These are all great points. The health of players, potentially playing in empty arenas. How does that affect officiating? These are all stories that are going to be dug into and will be justifiably talked about at that time.
Final question quickly, Chris. Any knowledge on the infection level across the league? Gobert obviously tests positive, and then Shams has that thing yesterday where 58 members of the Jazz traveling party tested, and they came back negative, which to me was what a great, pleasant surprise. I thought they were in deep trouble, given how bacteria and infections just rage through locker rooms in pro sports. But any word on the Celtics? They seem to think they're in the clear. Any word on that end of the story?
Yeah, I actually just filed a story that covers this a little bit just minutes ago. there's a tension amongst players that have played you can basically do 6 degrees of separation with the Jazz, for the last 2 weeks, and playing somebody that played the Jazz, you start to worry about it. So there's a lot of tension amongst players, even coaches that I talk to that want to be tested, but like the rest of this damn country, can't get the testing, right away, immediately. My understanding is that after back tracing Rudy Gobert's symptoms and how this all kind of came together, the only team that had potential to be nervous about was the Toronto Raptors, and they played the Jazz on March 9th. My understanding is that that's when Gobert first became symptomatic, which made him the most contagious, and that's why you saw immediately the Raptors put out a press release saying their entire team and traveling party were tested, not just quarantined, but tested right away. I think that information got to them immediately. Now, all the Jazz players, I've gotten a lot of this. People have gotten upset about how the Jazz were tested and how come rich basketball players get tested and the poor front of the line people can't get tested. Well, here's the reason why. This one had nothing to do with the NBA. This was the state of Oklahoma and the city of Oklahoma City. Oklahoma City had not had any positive tests up until that point. So Oklahoma officials, rightfully so, jumped on this and wanted to test everybody that was part of the Utah traveling party so that they could find out if one was positive, as 2 were, they could then backtrace their events and say, well, did this guy go to dinner at this place? Do we have to worry about quarantining there? They just wanted to get information about where these people have gone so they could quarantine those players. So any complaints about the Jazz getting tested, all those people getting tested, it's all the purview of the state of Oklahoma.
From what you understand, are the Celtics in the clear?
In the clear might be a little bit strong at this point. I know that they've told everybody to stay home for the next few days. The NBA has frankly mandated all that across the league. Again, there's not a serious concern with what is going on with the Celtics or their staff members at this point. They're going to wait and see if anybody shows any symptoms. But the primary concern is with the Toronto Raptors, and they have all been tested.
Chris, thanks so much for taking the time. We appreciate it.